Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. Just welcoming Kelsey and Marissa back to our December Dismantling Doctrine podcast Zoom call. Thank you so much, ladies, for dropping in. We'll see how it goes. It's a strange one because it's not our, as I said before we hit record, it's not our normal sort of evening to do these calls. We normally do it the third Sunday of the month, but obviously because it's December, we couldn't do it this time. But thank you. I wanted to get both of you back on the call because I enjoyed so much our chat about your book. And I've been thinking a lot about it. Obviously, I listened to the episode, promoted it. Wow. The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. How's it gone since we talked? How's the book sales going?
I think pretty well. From an author, I mean, I'm a first-time author. Marissa can probably speak from a place of having more to compare it to. But in this particular time, it just sort of feels like sending something out into the void, and you get little murmurs that this person received it really well, or this person read it. It's fantastic. But you don't really have a sense of the scale of it, and I also don't have anything to compare it to sales-wise. I'm very used to having kind of immediate responses to my public-facing work because I write for a periodical, and the response to those things is pretty immediate, and the turnaround time is so quick. So it's sort of participating in a discourse in a way that a book simply cannot, unless it's Ezra Klein's book on abundance or something. It's just a different kind of thing. So it's been really interesting. It has been incredibly meaningful to get notes from people who've been impacted by it, who felt seen by it. The experience of getting notes about what the work has meant to people has made me want to be a lot more proactive about writing to authors who write things that touch me in some way personally, because it's so encouraging and so meaningful, and makes it feel like even for those couple of people it was worthwhile.
No, I'm sure more than 2 people have read your book. What have you heard? Anything, Marissa?
Similarly, I've written fiction, but this is my first nonfiction book, and that's just, it's a different, everything about book launch is different, and so I don't know either. I mean, we won't really have a sense of sales, how everything's delayed in publishing for several months, but agree with what Kelsey said. It seems to have been well received, really meaningful to hear from people, a few people, early readers doing book groups, or I've dropped into a few this where it's a small group of people discussing, and that's been really powerful to hear people's individual stories where it's connected with them in the moment. But and then a few people don't like it, of course, as always fair, for a variety of reasons.
What? I'm shocked.
But
those good Christian parents out there.
There's some knee-jerk responses, but it's you send it out there and you trust it'll connect with the people it needs to connect with. And I mean, this week really wraps up most of we have a couple interviews and podcast conversations, most of our months of trying to connect with people now. I mean, we'll still probably do those occasionally as it makes sense, but it's been kind of a whirlwind. So
It's been really good. We were just talking, Marissa and I, before Kelsey joined the call. I've been watching, you've been posting a lot on Facebook, these little clips with Doug and Nancy Wilson. For those who don't know, can you explain maybe who Doug Wilson is? And there's some really disturbing stuff that both Doug and Nancy Wilson, his wife, have said, especially about spanking. And this goes to the heart, I think, of your whole thesis, isn't it? I mean, the myth of good Christian parenting. Doug and Nancy Wilson are promoting it 100%.
They are in on that. Doug is a really self-ordained, even his ordination is under question, kind of self-platformed pastor for decades at this point in Moscow, Idaho. He's kind of built a media empire that is very effective at marketing, particularly using streaming channels and through classical Christian education curriculum. He brands himself as a Christian nationalist pastor these days, so he's very politically motivated. I would tag him with Dominionism and Christian Reconstructionism. He's kind of dabbled in that in various ways. And a big portion of his audience are parents, are young parents of children, because he makes a lot of promises and is very clear. He has something called generational faithfulness he speaks to, is very clear that if you do parenting right, he doesn't at any disclaimers. You will guarantee generational Christians who can change the nation. In fact, he goes so far as to say, child apostatizes, parents really should feel shame. I mean, he just says that outright. We should not comfort them because they've failed. All his 3 grown children are all part of his media empire. They produce content. So he kind of points to that and says, if my children apostatize, I would leave the ministry. So, and apparently that's what his father, who was a pastor, told him. So there's a lot of pressure on that family. But yeah, their parenting content and advice is pretty much about dominion and expectations for instant compliance. And he's very clear about spanking. He advocates for parents to kind of institute periodic, what he calls reigns of terror, where they just spank for every infraction without warning to kind of get discipline under control. And the idea is cheerful obedience. Parents need to win. They are in authority. They need to show their authority, and children need to cheerfully comply. And that's the whole kind of Moscow mood, is look how cheerful we all are, kind of cheerful strength. And so, yeah, it's really all encompassing. It's very troubling to see it continually straddle that line between really fringe dominion and someone who has access to mainstream media. He was interviewed by CNN this year. He was interviewed by Ross Douthat this year. Pete Hegseth is the head of the Department of War in the U.S., is a known Wilson fan. He's tweeted him positively and kind of commended his resources, and attends a CREC church, which is the denomination Doug started. So there's a lot of influence in this current political moment that kind of makes him one to watch in a way that I think we kind of had maybe we never had the luxury of this, but I think 10 years ago someone would have said, oh, he's kind of fringe, but he definitely has a lot of influence now. Would you add stuff to that, Kelsey? I could talk about Doug for a long time, but
I'll let you talk about him. I don't have much to add to that, but yes, it has been disheartening to see the amount of media interest he has been able to generate, quite on purpose, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I live out in the Seattle area, so not that far from Idaho. And in this geographic region, you definitely see his influence. It's ecumenical, even though he is his own denomination. A lot of people are drawn to this kind of brash power. Really, this manifestation of Christian power, Christian supremacy that he kind of champions, and it's laced with misogyny. There's abuse is rife. Allegations of abuse, I should say, because he's quite litigious.
Oh yeah.
Allegations of abuse within his community.
A long list.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. He's a Christian patriarchy supporter, if not biblical patriarchy, which there's a slight theological difference if people are really interested in finding out what the difference is. But I was saying to Marissa before we hit record, I did a bunch of long form podcasts on Doug Wilson. I called it Investigating Doug Wilson's Religious Empire. And it's the more I got into it, the more kind of concerned I got, because, like you said, I did even more research on R.J. Rushdoony and Christian Reconstructionism, dominion theology, and what it seemed to me. I mean, Doug Wilson, he skirts around the issue, but in reality, he's basically living out the sort of vision that R.J. Rushdoony sketched out back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the homeschooling connection, the Christian schooling connection. These are all things that Rushdoony, he's the father of Christian homeschooling. He had a major influence in the founding of Christian day schools. So here's Doug Wilson parroting a dominionist agenda, which Rushdoony argued was the idea that if you just raise up generations of godly children, eventually you will take dominion. And that's Doug Wilson's basic agenda, isn't it? In so many words, you could break it down that simply.
I think so. And he'll fudge with so many terms, but he really wants a theocracy as defined by the patriarchs in power, right? So he would kind of say, well, everything is biblical that we're saying, but it's, of course, as always, selective interpretation. But I think it can be really compelling to people who have a high regard for scripture. They kind of can be, oh, well, okay, we would want biblical principles, right? And so it can be really motivating for certain corners of the church. And he is, I don't want to say wordsmith, but I think that's a term he uses for himself. But there's a lot of words. It's a lot of words. He produced much content, and
he's a prolific writer.
Talks so much, and I think some people can really get swept up with that. I don't know. Have you read Tia Levin's memoir, The Well-Trained Wife? Really excellent.
Yeah, I had her on the show. Yeah. I interviewed her about that.
Yeah, because she talked about how leaving Southern Baptist Convention fundamentalism, Wilson's community and that rhetoric felt intellectual, felt more enlightened. So kind of was appealing to people who were, oh, he's quoting Chesterton and Lewis, and we can drink whiskey and have cigars. It kind of felt different. And I think as a result, sometimes people can leap from one kind of high control fundamentalism into that because it appeals to maybe Anglophile sensibilities or something. And I thought that was a really astute observation, because it can be easy maybe to be on the outside and be like, how do people fall for that? Why would anyone want that, particularly women? Why would women choose that? And yeah, it really appeals to different longings.
Fall for the aesthetics, you know.
Yeah.
I think one writer who I Hannah Anderson, I don't know that she's written about this publicly, but I was talking to her recently about the role of generational turnover in these kinds of waves and cycles, because Doug Wilson is just, you said, connecting him to Rushdoony and previous iterations of Reconstructionism just makes the point that these ideas are cyclical, and that each generation of Christians in America and throughout history has its own factions of people that aren't just theological factions. They're also aesthetic factions, right? They're factions of personality also. And I think when we look at a figure like Doug Wilson and what's drawing people that way, it is aesthetics as much as it is him being correct about certain things. I mean, it's just, there's not one thing that pushes people in that direction. Just like there was not one thing that drew people toward Mark Driscoll or Rob Bell. Weirdly enough, people in the millennial and younger Gen X, some of the same people were drawn to both Rob Bell and Mark Driscoll. Even though they were ideologically different, they were as similar in a weird way, right? Even like the Donald Miller. You think about what held the emerging church together. It's a weird group of people that don't necessarily share, I mean, and have kind of run to different corners in terms of actual theological distinctives. But I think we sometimes over the draw of the theological distinctives. And then they start to play out once people are there. And then we start to dig underneath. But I think I have a lot I could say about Doug Wilson. I try to hold my tongue with this because I have some theories and I have some pretty strong opinions about what's going on there that I would just keep to myself. But I don't want to overlook that I think there are a number of things that draw people to him. I don't think it is that. I think some people make the mistake of thinking that, oh, he must be doing something right, because people want to go to where the power is, and he's managed to amass a lot of power. But it's not one thing that has caused that. He's riding the coattails of a lot of people. He's also riding reactions to a lot of this, right? Like reaction to things, the seeker sensitive movement. There are a lot of people who run from seeker sensitivity for different reasons. And they find him, and maybe it's the beer, maybe it's the beard, maybe it's the willingness to be really crass about queer people. Maybe it is the absolute misogyny. There's a whole list of things. Maybe it's that he likes singing hymnody. You know what I mean? Like, it's that the aesthetics of classical education. There are a lot of things. And he has been very savvy that way in getting people to run in that direction and be willing to over or not notice things that are there.
Yeah, my argument was that he's running a cult. It's a cult basically in Moscow, Idaho. I think Christchurch is a cult, or it fits many of the characteristics of a cult. He fits many of the characteristics of a typical cult leader. And essentially, his vision is to take over the town of Moscow, Idaho. He wants to Christianize. So essentially, his vision is, if he's a Reconstructionist or a Dominionist, he's saying, look, we're going to take over Moscow. We're going to Christianize Moscow. This is going to be the first sort of, we're going to plant our flag here. And then this is a case study, if you will, for what could happen for the rest of the nation. You can construct a community of mine and win, if you will. And yet the people of Moscow, Idaho, there's been a tremendous amount of pushback. I mean, I picked it up on years ago. There was a conference held, I think it was at the University of Idaho, about his book, Southern Slavery as It Was. And that's basically what kind of put Doug Wilson on the map in terms of the locals recognizing who he was when they read his book. It was, what?
Who is this guy?
And he's never apologized for it. He's never retracted it. In fact, he wrote a second book, Black and Tan, and it just goes on and on from there. So that guy's a real piece of work. And yet he's being platformed by people like John Piper, Tucker Carlson, as if he's just a normal sort of evangelical. So that's my take. I don't know what are your thoughts about.
It's interesting because exactly that. He's, for years, I think, has reached the maximum of what he can do in Moscow with his vision, right? People move there who are drawn by it. That happened a lot during COVID. We saw people from this area move there because of the political discourse around that. But it's at its max capacity. But given his savviness with marketing, I think he can still pitch this vision to many people through streaming channels, and I think really give the illusion that his empire is bigger than it is, that his church is bigger than it is, that he has more control in Moscow than he does.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns as well.
And there's a lot of concerns. Well, another couple of names we talked about in the podcast, Bill Gothard is another big name, Dr. James Dobson. And I was doing some research this week. I actually asked AI. I was just messing around with Gemini, and I said, okay, I've done a lot of research on this topic. I want to see what Gemini says about how did the ideas of Christian Reconstruction creep into not only the Christian right, but basically broader evangelicalism. And one of the names that came up was Bill Gothard. It said he wasn't a card-carrying Christian Reconstructionist. However, his his basic thesis goes along with your book, wasn't it? That if you raise your children in a certain way, you're going to guarantee basically certain outcomes, compliance, obedience, godliness, and all the rest of it. And again, generations, you're going to have, I don't know if Bill Gothard ever used the word dominion specifically, but in effect, he was preaching that same kind of argument.
Yeah,
wasn't he?
I think, if I remember correctly, he appeals to the dominion mandate of Genesis, right? A lot of these people do. Doug Phillips' a vision for him as well. So a lot of times they're aware enough to distance from someone like Rushdoony. They're not going to openly be, yes, I'm on board with that, but they're influenced.
He was too
by
controversial.
it.
That was the problem, is that that's how it seeped into the Christian right, as I understand it, that they picked up his ideas, but they didn't say, oh, I've read Institutes of Biblical Law, or I read Rush, but they echoed his thought, and it seeped into evangelicalism and the Christian right in the 1980s, right around the time of Ronald Reagan's election, which is a fascinating kind of time period. I've been reading a book. I've been reading this book about, I'm reading Holy Terror by Colin Siegelman. I don't know if you've come across that, but it's the classic edition is back on now. And they were the first ones back in 1979, 1980. They actually traveled all over America because they were seeing the rise of the early Christian right. And they were going, what is this thing? What is this? And they basically were on the ground. And that book basically talks about how it started, how the whole thing started. And so it's a fascinating case study because they were there. I've had them on the show a number of times. So I would recommend Holy Terror if you're interested in finding out some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes it can feel, this has always been there, particularly for younger generations who grew up in it, versus recognizing it had this very distinct origin. Yeah. Holy Terror. I'm going to write that down. Okay.
Yeah, Holy Terror. It's the classic edition is available now, and I've had them on the show numerous times. If you want to hear some of our podcasts on it, I was going to say I'll send you to the link the series that I did on Doug Wilson.
Oh yeah, that'd be
really
great.
fascinating. We went into all really deep dives on Doug Wilson.
It's helpful.
The other
to
thing I
have
was
that
going to
out
ask
there.
you was
Yeah.
and I noticed because I tagged one of your posts with the Examining Moscow and Doug Wilson Idaho Facebook group. And they said, oh yeah, we're obviously tracking this stuff with Marissa because I tag a lot of their stuff when it comes to Doug Wilson.
We're going to be right back in just a few minutes. This is kind of a bonus episode. If you haven't figured this out by now, this was actually our December 2025 Dismantling Doctrine podcast Zoom call. We had it on the 7th of December, which was a bit strange. I alluded to that at the beginning of the show. I had Marissa and Kelsey back on to talk about their book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, which was an episode that dropped toward the end of last year. But due to the fact that it was on kind of a strange day in December and it was around the holiday time, nobody was actually able to drop into the call. But I had a really good conversation with Kelsey and Marissa. So I'm going to turn this one, as you've gathered by now, into a podcast episode. When we come back, we're going to be getting into evangelical purity culture, how that broadens out. We're going to talk about the stay-at-home daughter movement. And really what's interesting is these kind of ideas, not only are they kind of cyclical, they keep coming around and around again and again, but also how social media amplifies them. So there's a lot coming up in the second half. I just wanted to mention what's coming up here in the next few episodes. I've had a really good conversation with author Tia Levings. She's, of course, a returning guest. We're talking about her new book. It's called I Belong to Me, A Survivor's Guide to Recovery and Hope After Religious Trauma. We had a phenomenal conversation, not just about her new book, but really how this book now is a kind of a continuation of her first book, A Well-Trained Wife. And it kind of goes from there and picks up where the book leaves off.
And it picks up this idea of obviously religious trauma, religious abuse, and so forth, things that she herself suffered, how she found help and healing outside of religion, outside of the church. So it's a very helpful resource for those who have been hurt and abused, especially within a Christian patriarchal type movement as Tia was. And then I'm going to be talking to Gareth Gore. He, of course, is the author of the book Opus, which is all about Opus Dei, which is essentially basically I consider it a cult. It's a Catholic cult. It's a worldwide movement. We've heard of them a little bit. Maybe you've heard of them through the Da Vinci Code, the book by Dan Brown. That was probably the first time anyone had ever heard of Opus Dei, but it actually is a real thing. It's a real movement within the Catholic Church. It comes out of Spain slightly before the Spanish Civil War, so it's been around a long time, and now it's infiltrated the halls of power in Washington, D.C., and indeed the rest of the world. So I'm really excited to be talking to someone who has done a seriously high-level amount of research on this movement within the Catholic Church, Opus Dei. So stay tuned for that conversation with Gareth Gore. And then I think I'm going to release a couple of chapters from my book that I came out with last year. It is called Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People, How Bill Gothard, Church and Family Taught Me Christianity Doesn't Work. So I'm going to be doing that coming up after the episodes with Tia and Gareth. If you can't wait till then, you can always find a copy of the book. It's available only on Amazon as a Kindle version, a paperback, or of course the Audible version that I myself narrated telling my own story. So that is available on Amazon. And do me a favor, if you do pick up a copy of the book, leave a good review on Amazon, which helps greatly with the book's rankings. I just wanted to mention too, as I said before at the beginning of this break, this episode with Marissa and Kelsey, this is a Dismantling Doctrine podcast Zoom call, which we have once a month. We had one last month with Nick P. from the Autistic Pod. He and I did a crossover episode that came out in January, or maybe it was February. But we had a really good time chatting with Nick, catching up with him. We are going to have another DDP Zoom call on the 22nd of March with Catherine Sparing. And of course, she's another returning guest. She's the author of the book 1,000 Tiny Paper Cuts. It's all about the insidious nature of spiritual abuse. So if you want to get on those calls, we do those every month. We do them on usually the third Sunday of the month. So if you want to catch up with Catherine Sparing, talk to her about spiritual abuse and how to recover from it, you can become a Patreon supporter of the show. And as always, I'll put the link to that in the show notes, and that will give you access to these DDP Zoom calls we have every month. I'm working on the guest for April's call. I'm actually hoping to have maybe Tia Levings come back. I'm going to email her and find out if she can make it. And maybe if she can't do it, perhaps Timmy Joe Gibson. I've emailed him. I haven't heard back from him yet, but I'm going to keep working on that. I will keep you praised of who our guest is going to be in the month of April. But that's a really good benefit you get for being a Patreon supporter of the show. So let's get on back into, this is really kind of a bonus episode, revisiting the myth of good Christian parenting with Marissa Burt and Kelsey McGinnis.
I was going to say the other thing, I was going to ask you about these Christian sex manuals. I don't know if we talked about that on the side. Do you get into that in the book? Because that, I think that does go along with, I was trying to explain to my girlfriend what actually is a Christian sex manual, that she was, what are you talking about? And I said, my response was, well, it's twofold. It promotes the myth of a virginal couple on the wedding night. That's the first time they have sex, and they don't know what they're doing. So a lot of times it ends in tragedy or tears or something. So it's saying, look, you need to improve your sex life, but it's a godly way to do it. So on one hand, it's just a practical manual. But on the other hand, it's promoting the myth of, if you raise your kids this way, according to your myth of good Christian parenting, when they're on the altar, you deliver them to the altar as a father and a mother, the sex is going to be mind-blowing. It's going to be incredible. And oftentimes it isn't. And so you find out, wait, I need a Christian sex manual. It's a thing, isn't it? It really is a thing.
We don't get into that a lot in the book. No, I mean, we get into the ways that the sort of importance of this particular vision of Christian marriage is so over any ideas about parenting, right? It all kind of feeds each other in building this perfect, ideal Christian home with mother and father at the top, father over it all, and all the pieces that need to be ideal ideally in place. I think those are just another example of all of these different manuals. One thing that this does, all the books about Christian parenting, marriage, sex, they give the impression that there is one right way to do things, right? And it makes it so easy then to turn around and when something fails to point to user error. And that makes it very easy for someone, Doug Wilson, for example, who is trying to argue that if we do this right, if I can build this ideal Christianized society where everybody buys in and everybody does it right, you're going to see how amazing this is. You're going to see how utopian this is. And we will prove to the rest of the world that everything and everyone is better when they do it this way. But it's impossible. But it gives everybody then at the top kind of plausible deniability to say, well, and with something like sex, it's not so private. It's something that you could say, well, their marriage wasn't that strong. You never know what's going on behind closed doors. It builds in all of these points of failure where when someone who is trying to build this Christian authoritarian city can say, well, the people who are failing here just aren't doing it right. And
victim blaming.
Yeah. And sex is a really easy place to do that. Marriage is a really easy place to do that because there's so much shame then built in. If you're a Christian couple and you are having a hard time, there's so much shame in not having a great sex life because you've been promised this thing. And you also have people, Mark Driscoll, who make it part of their brand to talk about how great and important sex is and how and how necessary and how if it's not going well and a husband cheats, it's the wife's fault. I mean, it's just all these horrifying things that lie underneath it once you start looking at them. But sorry, that's all to say we do not get a lot into our book.
Yeah, I agree with the performativity of it too. I think there's a real element. I'm just reading actually this weekend Frank Schaeffer's book Crazy for God, and I know we've talked about that, and there's a bit in it that comes to mind when you were talking, Kelsey. It's excellent, by the way. I'm fascinated by it, where he says, talking about the kind of thrust of his parents' ministry and evangelicalism of feeling they're on the outside, wanting to convince all the insiders that they are doing it the better way so that then they can become insiders. There's this kind of impulse to be superior, to be set apart, but to belong and be superior. And I think some of that comes into play, particularly around things sex, because what you get is kind of the crass performativity from the pulpit. You have a Mark Driscoll talking about it. It's not just to tell other people how to do sex right? It's also to kind of communicate that he's really doing it right, that he and his marriage are amazing. And so I do think there's a lot of insecurity woven throughout that it doesn't matter what topic it is, but it's on repeat. We have to show that we're doing it the best way, not just that we've chosen this way, but that everyone should, and our way is best for everyone. It's that fundamentalist thinking that creeps in. But we touch on quiverful a little bit and a little bit of purity culture, but there's so much we would have liked to include more in the book. I mean, this certainly would be a piece of it because it betrays a lot of people, right? Particularly young people raised in this. They're set up to believe if I wait, the young men are told all my sexual fantasies will be fulfilled in marriage. And the young women are kind of told that your purity is your most important sense of worth. And then your job is to fulfill all his desires. And then the myths of what those desires are circulate. I love Sheila Gregoire's work on this, exposing some of that. Kelsey, were you going to say something? Right?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I just was going to say, I just had the episode that came out the other day was with Catherine Spearing. And she just wrote a book called 1,000 Tiny Paper Cuts. It's all about the insidious nature of spiritual abuse and recovering on the back end. And she was a stay-at-home daughter. So that's another thing, isn't it? Where you go, okay, this is an even more extreme element of the Christian patriarchy pushed by people, Doug Wilson, where these girls are raised where they have to submit to their father, and they're told, you maintain your virginity, that's just part of it. When I hand you over on the wedding day to your new husband, you will then transfer my authority over you to your new husband, and that's part of it. And then you get the dark side. I don't know if you've read that article by Sarah Stenker in Vice. It was a few years ago, but it was about Doug Wilson, and she talked to a number of women as part of the Christchurch Moscow sort of cult, or whatever you want to call it, where they talk about essentially marital, and that is a thing where their husbands demand sex from them because I am the man. You will submit even if you don't want it, you don't feel it.
God
I don't
requires
care.
this of you.
So there's a very dark side, and Doug he's promoted that sort of rape culture, that sort of thing. Well, what did she wear? What if she's not submitting to a man? if a woman gets raped, he's actually written something to this effect that basically it's her fault if she gets raped because she hasn't submitted to a man. So that's the dark, really dark side to this whole biblical patriarchy, Christian purity culture thing.
It's a no-win scenario. Wilson and Joe Rigney at the seminary there, just I think last year's no quarter November, Emily Page Dye, who's a survivor whose high school teacher, Jim Nance at Lagos School, assaulted and abused her. And she's gone public with her story, and still the leaders there will blame her and say she's responsible for her sin in this. So there very much is an incapacity to see things through any lens but patriarchy at that level, and it's horrific. In the stay-at-home daughter movement too, you have a lot of survivors of that movement pointing to the ways teaching sexualize the father-daughter relationship. Not in every case, but in many cases, the idea daughters need to practice for marriage by serving their father, whether that was shaving him or giving him foot massages, or all of these sort of things that within the community became normative but are so ripe for abuse in a number of ways and just incredibly destructive. And it was such a big move, or relatively big movement in the 90s, but occasionally I'll see influencers, social media influencers today resurrecting this movement and talking about, well, we don't need to send girls to college because we just need to train them to be good wives and homemakers. And it's again, that same messaging on repeat.
Good submissive wives.
It's really sad.
Yep. And then you get that, repeat. And that's the generations that they want to raise. Those are the generations that Rush Journey was talking about the 10 Commandments and honor your father and your mother. He unpacks that in basically the same way in his books, because I've read his books and I've done a lot of reading on Rush Journey. So here's the basis for all that.
Well, and the kicker is,
were you going to add
it just
anything?
doesn't, right? We have all the generations,
Exactly.
The Vision Forum generation, the stay-at-home daughter movement, Gothard's movement. The generation doesn't stay. Like the retention rate, you probably would know. What is it with IBLP? It's 3% or something that actually stick with it. It's so low. You just feel like today you want to be, if nothing else, guys, it doesn't work. It's not going to work for you.
It doesn't work. And that I will let you go because I don't want to keep you too long, but that was the last question I was going to ask both of you. One thing that really stuck with me when we talked about the book a few months ago was you said, okay, back then when all these books were written, people made literal empires. Dobson, Gothard, and so many others wrote books, gave conferences, gave seminars, tens of thousands of people hanging on their every word. They made millions. They really did. They had huge followings. However, the myth has been shattered because you said we now have case study after case study. And I said, I'm one of those case studies. I was raised in the Bill Gothard fundamentalist cult. I was raised in all of that. I was told all those same things. I went to the conferences when I was a kid at the Seattle Center. So I'm one of the case studies. I am just part of a bigger movement of people that came out of that thing. What have you found out about that? Because I mean, we're living proof basically that it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Again, I'm going to go back to cycles and generations here, because it is really, when you do these interviews, you hear people recounting the rise and fall of trends and how evangelicalism turns spiritual ideas into trends and sells them as promises to people. And there are real live people who spend a part of their life believing those promises. It's different than being convinced to buy a waterbed. There's a phase where everyone was into waterbeds. This is like,
I have one.
Right?
I got sucked into it.
This is the thing that American evangelicalism to do, is the entrepreneurial spirit ends up convincing people to upend their lives and their children's lives in order to try something for a while. And for some people, it's authoritarian parenting. For some people, it is quite literally abuse. You know, there are many different things that feed into that. And so the trends die down, right? IBLP is a weird kind of movement trend that absolutely lost steam and has gone away, except for the ways those ideas, someone else kind of picks up the kernel of the thing that gave that steam. And if they can package it right and sell it at the right time, they can find the people who are captivated by that way of thinking. And it just happens and again and again. And people don't recognize it as the same thing because it's not the same person. It's not the same brand. But a lot of the time, it's the same ideas getting recycled. And we see that playing out in these stories. We see it playing out in influencer content right in front of our faces. We see it playing out in almost verbatim plagiarized books that we looked at. It's really maddening to watch. So when we say these myths have been kind of busted, it's, well, kind of. It's the people became passé. But there is still so much culture panic in evangelicalism that there's a right way to do this. The world is going mad. There's a right way to do this. That myth, I think people just, and because parenting is literally a generational thing. You have new parents coming out all the time who are looking for things. It feeds this recycling, this redoing again and again.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Now you get people, Joel, and people he's out there basically parroting. He's going in even further now, saying women shouldn't be allowed to vote. And he's got a huge platform.
Well, and I think when in this moment, when it's even easier for someone to self-platform themselves successfully and generate income, things rage baiting become a piece of this too, in a way that I think grift has always been a piece of it. It's impossible to kind of tease that out from a distance. Who was sincere and who was not? But in this moment, you have a really ripe moment for people to take it even further because it's very lucrative to do so. And there's not even what minimal accountability someone James Dobson might have had being in an actual community or having to go through some kind of channels, radio broadcast channel or something. When Joel Webham sets himself up there, I think he claims to be a pastor, but I can't envision there being many people in his church or any kind, you know what I mean? So it's just a guy tweeting, but he's got 100,000 followers going along, you know?
He says things on his
so
YouTube
it
channel.
becomes kind of mixing with grift culture in a new way. But I think all of this, what's baked in is if it doesn't work, it's user error. So I think that makes it possible for new generations to pick it up and just be, well, they must have done something wrong, right? It's passé. He gets revived by the Duggars. Well, the Duggars' fruit is rotten, right? But people can be, well, the Duggars didn't do it quite right, because there's still that belief, I can do it the superior way that will show everyone God's ways are best. That missional impulse is there too. And because there's that thread of this is timeless biblical truth, maybe, I think people will continue returning to it. I think the thing that's timeless about it is not that, right? Is the appeal to the fears and longings. I think those are timeless for parents. A fear of what could go wrong, wanting a formula that says, I can control this and get a good outcome. That impulse is timeless. So whether it's an influencer selling lifestyle with supplements and whatever for your kids, that can appeal to that as well, right?
Pizza buckets.
Yeah, it can take different
the
forms.
buckets.
Colloidal silver.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
It's the same kind of thing.
That's what. Yeah, I was gonna say back to what Kelsey's point. So good that the new iteration meets a new generation, doesn't it? Because we go back to Holy Terror. It's so fascinating because they talk about the rise of fundamentalism in not just America, but of course you see it in America. People like Jerry Falwell Sr. and people, they were fundamentalist preachers first that started on the radio, then transitioned in television. There were people obviously before Falwell, Oral Roberts, and others, but these people, fundamentalism always needs a target. It needs an enemy. And so they would talk about evolution. They would talk about liberal theology. They would talk about, then it was the homosexual agenda. It was something, women's rights or something. It was always something. And then some real savvy players in Washington, D.C. said, hey, that audience that you've got, guys Falwell, Roberts, Pat Robertson, they're a lot of unregistered voters. We need to somehow get them involved in the political sector. So again, they've always had an enemy. Yeah. And now it was you guys like Bill Gothard. People were freaking out during the counterculture revolution in the 1960s. And here comes a guy, Gothard or Dobson, and says, hey, listen, I know you're freaking out. I know you're afraid. You're panicking about the hippies out on the streets and having sex and doing drugs and everything. Listen to the Grateful Dead. You raise your kids this way, that won't happen to them. So it's the same exact principle, isn't it?
It really is. Yep. And it's disturbing, to see the political rhetoric get even more charged and the targets shifting. And I find it, because I try in social media, follow a number of people so I can hear the messaging that's coming out from the modern day parenting influencers. And I would say it's wild to see, even in the past 5 years, the shift in rhetoric to have immigration be such a strong note in it. Like, this is the new enemy, this political ground that has always been there, I think, but to see it shift for like new generation, new adults, I would say, like young adults in their 20s, and to be on the tip of everyone's tongue, or kind of the fear-driven stories around Muslims or different things that weren't there. I mean, they were there around 9/11, but weren't there at other times in evangelical discourse. But yeah, you can see the kind of it tracks really well with the political fear-mongering of the moment as well.
Yeah. Now Trump's talking about Somalis in Minnesota. I mean, that's the new target. Yeah. People get rid of those Somalis, send them back to their homeland. You got to have a scapegoat. You got to have somebody to blame, a target. Well, okay, let's get ICE out there and arrest people on the street. Even Christians are being arrested. That's the crazy thing. People are being dragged out of churches. I read an article the other day about a church I think it was in Georgia, basically a Hispanic church, where ICE raided the church service, and Christians are being deported without due cause. And it's, wow, due process. That's what I was going to say. They're being deported without due process. And American evangelicals are, well, if they're illegal, get rid of them. Yes. Well, they're your fellow Christians. I mean, you talk about Christians being persecuted. It's actually happening by the guy you guys voted for.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. Well, I will let you go because I know you probably got things to do, but I was going to ask you two both, do you want me to, we mentioned this before, do you want me to put you in touch with Frank Schaefer? Because I did talk about that before, but I'm not sure we ever did.
We're actually with
him
this week.
Show.
Yeah.
Yep,
so thank you.
Oh, you are going to be on his show.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, really good. Yeah. Okay.
So thank you for that. So that's why I'm reading his book and because it's been on my reading list for a while. So this is the final nudge, but it's really good. So I'm excited to speak with him.
It's really good. Yeah. The beautiful thing about Frank, I was just on his show about maybe 6 weeks ago talking about my book, Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People, and it talked about Bill Gothard and all that. And he thoroughly read the book. He had quotes from the book, so it really put me on the spot. Okay, do I know what I wrote? It's like, of all the interviews I've done about my book, he was the best as far as he really clearly had read it, was totally prepared for the interview. So it's always going to be really good. So I recommend, definitely. Glad you hooked up with Frank.
Great.
But how can people find the book again, and how can people get a hold of you if they wanted to talk further?
You can order the book. The book is out. You can find it. It might be on the shelf at Barnes & Noble, or depending on your indie. It's at our independent bookstores here in Iowa, which is fun, or a couple of them. You can order from Brazos, from Baker, the Baker website, or from Amazon, obviously. Both of us have our own Substacks under our own names, and we're both pretty active on Instagram and Threads. Marissa is more active on Twitter than I am these days. I don't have the patience for it.
It's fair.
Yeah. You don't want to help Elon Musk. He just got fined in the $140 million by the EU. Then he turned around and said, we need to abolish the EU. That's what we need to do.
Still convenient.
Yeah, that'll be the answer. But $140 million is nothing to Elon Musk. I mean, it's a $5 bill. It's nothing. So people can find
you can find
pretty
us
much all the
across social media.
platforms.
In the spring we did a limited podcast series called In the Church Library, where we had conversation about some of the specific resources. So talking about Michael Pearl's book To Train Up a Child, or Gary Ezzo's book Baby Wise. And then we also interviewed people with adjacent expertise. So if that's of interest to you, you want to go further, we kind of think of our social media channels as an online appendix for a lot of the things if you want to put some of these things under a microscope. So find us there. We'd love to connect.
Yeah, thank you so much. What I'll do, I think I might just release this conversation as another podcast, kind of a bonus episode. Normally we have a half dozen people drop in, but I've been promoting this for about a month, but since we nailed down the date, but I think it was probably a weird day because I say most of the time we do the last Sunday of the month, but I'm so glad we still caught up.
Nice.
Me too.
And thank you so much for writing your book. I always love chatting with you. So thank you. Enjoy your Sunday, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. I'll send you the link to my Doug Wilson episode if you've got nothing more to do. Then
I may dust it off next November. We're still have to talk about this guy, so maybe I'll share it next November. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Kelsey and Marissa. I'll see you again. Keep in touch. Take care.
Bye.